What's happening, team? Liam from Lazarus Personal Training. In this video, I'm going to talk about the neck bridge, why we use it, and to answer the question of should we use a neck bridge. As a word of warning for this video, I'm filming this probably the earliest I've ever filmed a video. I'm sort of half awake, so if any of this comes out a little bit rambly, that's your reason. When we're looking at the neck and the neck bridge and training the neck, I'm going to go through 3 points here. I'm going to go through the anatomy of the neck and what that looks like. I'm going to talk on the neck bridge itself and why that has come to prevalence as a movement for wrestling. And then I'm going to talk about the training of the neck and if I think that neck bridges should be included in that process. So to begin with, let's look at the ins and outs of the neck. What does the neck do? Well, the neck connects the head to the body. I think a little bit of the neck like the core. Where the core connects the hips to the shoulders, the neck connects the shoulders to the head. So it offers a supportive point. Our head is heavy, that just goes without saying. So this neck needs to be strong and stable to support our head. Also, the spinal column runs through the neck, obviously, and it is the first point of call in that transmission from the body. So from the head and the brain comes down straight into the neck. So we need this neck to be protected, because if it's not protected, that first point of call is damaged, and we definitely don't want to damage our spinal cord. The neck is also really prevalent in avoiding concussions, which is probably the most important bit that we'll talk about today when it comes to wrestling. A concussion is when the brain is rocked and slammed into the inside of the skull. A strong neck avoids concussion by avoiding that whiplash effect. So we want a strong neck because in wrestling, where we're taking bumps, that whiplash effect can happen. If we're looking at what makes up the neck, there are 7 vertebrae. That's C1 to C7. C1 and 2 are atlas and axis joints. So they are some of the most mobile joints in the body. Think about the range of motion that you can go through with your neck, and that's all down to these 2 joints that are sat at the top of our spine. When I'm talking about vertebrae and C1 to C7, they are discs that are in the spine. When we look at a vertebrae, it has like a body section, a hollowed bit, and then 3 processes, 2 transverse processes, and then 1 spinal process. They're all connected together through discs. And when we talk about disc herniation or disc bulge, that is when the fluid of the disc pops in between the 2 vertebrae. It puts pressure onto the nerves that are on the outside, and thus we get pain through that. And then when we're looking at the muscles of the neck, there are a lot of muscles that we have in this area. The 2 main ones that we'll focus on, or the 2 main ones that I'll talk about here, are the traps, which connect our back and our shoulders to the back of the head. And then we also have the sternomastoid, which, being completely honest, I had to look up, but it's the main muscle that runs from the clavicle up, or the sternum up, hence sterno. And again, there are loads of muscles in that neck area. The reason why that's important will come up later when I'm talking about training the neck and the processes that we need for training the neck. Let's talk about the neck bridge. A staple of wrestling. It's super common whenever people think about wrestling, they will in some form think about a neck bridge. It's basically been a staple of neck training for wrestling for years. Where it comes from though, or at least where I think that it comes from through learning and just observation, when we're looking at amateur wrestling and when we're looking at professional wrestling, what is the number 1 aim? What's the main defense? Is to have your shoulders off of the mat. So to avoid having your shoulders on the mat, especially if you're on your back, what's the best thing that you can do? Pop those shoulders completely off the mat. With that, we end up in a bridge position. So it's more from necessity of being able to pop into that position than it is the practicality of it. And in the same way, if we are performing a throw, especially a throw that lends us going overhead, for example, a German suplex, and we want to keep our shoulders off of the mat, again, we want to pop up into that bridge position. So it is the necessity of the movement to be able to be in that position more than the practicality of the movement. But I think when we're looking at the neck bridge, there are several things that we need to take into consideration. Number one, and the main thing above anything else, is that it actually doesn't train the neck muscles. Think about it. Think about the position that you go into with a neck bridge. One, you are hyperextended, and hyperextension is basically where we bend up and back. In the same way that you can hyperextend your lumbar spine, you can hyperextend the cervical spine too, which is our C1 to C7. It's hyperextended, and then from there, there's no actual training of the muscle. Yes, the front section is stretched, and yes, the traps and the back section are compressed, but actually there's no force and no resistance that is being put into that movement. We are just literally resting on our head. And then we look at compression as well. One, compression of our posterior muscles, and then compression on the spine itself. And if your neck isn't used to being in that position, can't handle being in that position, and your vertebrae are compressed together, that can potentially lead to that disc bulge or hernia that I mentioned earlier on. And again, just to finalize it, this is a lot of pressure that's on the neck. I mean, if you're not used to having that pressure on your neck and then you suddenly go into a neck bridge, that is probably half of your body weight that's just resting on your skull, straight through your head. And if you aren't used to that position, that can cause a fair bit of damage. When we're looking at training the neck then, we need to think of it in the same way that we think of the core or we think of other muscles, and we need to add resistance to it. Now, there is an invention that's been made by a guy whose name escapes me, I apologize, but he created this thing called the iron neck. The iron neck is basically a piece of equipment that you strap onto your head. It looks like you've got a spaceship on your head, but it allows you to rotate. It allows you to go through flexion, extension, lateral flexion and extension. It's used often in NFL strength and conditioning circles, and also it's used in the WWE Performance Center. I know Joe DeFranco's had him on his podcast, and there's a lot of people that swear by the iron neck. Now, I've never seen one because they are expensive pieces of kit, but I don't think it's the only way that we can train the neck. Is it the most conducive and is it the better way of training the neck? Quite possibly, but it's not the only way that we can train the neck. Simple, really simple ways that we can train the neck are using our hands to offer resistance. So for example, if we want to go into flexion, if we want to drop forward and create some strength in the front of our neck, well, that is a curl position. With that, if we offer some resistance by placing our fist onto our chin and offering the same amount of resistance as we're putting down and putting up, then we are training those neck muscles in an isolated fashion. In the same way, if we want to train our extenders, if we want to train the top of our trap muscles, all we've got to do is put our hand on the back of our head and resist. And again, we're training in an isometric position. This then builds up the strength of the neck, and especially when the neck is there to stabilize, it wants to hold position, we're probably better training it in an isometric fashion. Another way that we can train the neck is by using bands, and this is something that I bring in now and again if I want to strengthen up my neck a little bit, if I'm feeling a little bit weak in that area, or if I just feel like I haven't done it in a while. Attaching a band to something head height and then putting the band around the back of your head, and with the band I would advise either a red resistance band or one of the smaller mini bands. Place it around their head and then you just offer that resistance. So for example, I have done them before with lateral raises. So I put the band around the back of my head, perform the lateral raise movement, and that just gives me a little bit of extra work, a little bit of a bonus when it comes to some neck strength training. And there are apparatus that you can buy for cable machines that you can put around your head that do exactly the same thing. But again, in the same way that people might neglect their entire core, a lot of people, myself included, neglect training the neck. And we want to be able to train the neck. We should be training the neck. We should be looking after a crucial part of our body. To round this out and to answer the question, do I think neck bridges should be used? And my answer to that question is yes. Now, I've given a lot of evidence and a lot of opinion as to probably why we shouldn't be using a neck bridge. But again, I want us to think about the practicality of the neck bridge. We will probably end up in a position where we have to bridge in wrestling. whether that be through our moveset or whether that be through a necessity, we will have to go into a bridge position. So we need that neck to be strong. Do I think that people should be starting by just going straight into a neck bridge? No, we should work up into it. The neck should be loosened off first. It should be trained in other aspects. We should do the reverse bridge position where we're almost in a headstand so we can apply weight through it, but not as much. We should be using things like another person to help us go down into a neck bridge position rather than just going straight into that neck bridge by itself. But the neck bridge is something that we use on a practical basis. It's not to say that the neck bridge trains the neck, but if we have to perform it, we need to be in those positions. In the same way, if we stand up and sit down all day, we probably need to perform some squat motion. So what do you think of the neck bridge? Is it something that you've been comfortable with? Could you sit in a neck bridge for hours? Does it hurt, and do you not enjoy being in a neck bridge? Let me know your experiences in the comments below. If you've liked this video and you found it informative, give it a like and share it. If you really like my content, subscribe to the channel because it massively helps. I've been Liam from Lazarus Personal Training, and I am going to go stand on my head.